All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to treat your relationship like a measurable, optimizable system. Welcome to the absolute frontier of modern romance. We are moving way, way beyond your basic gadget reviews here and penetrating the deep core of neuroscience and psychology. We're going to explore how biometric data and cutting edge wearables can actually decode your partner's mind and optimize your brain's dopamine receptors. So, if you're ready for some real actionable behavioral shifts, you are exactly in the right place. Let's get into it. We've got a really clear clinical roadmap for today. First, we'll hit the dopamine resistance epidemic, then the evolution of romantic tech, and straight into biohacking empathy with wearables. After that, we'll dive into haptics and sexual gamification, look at the billion-dollar love tech economy, and finally wrap up with how to balance all this data with real human emotion. Starting off with part one, the dopamine resistance epidemic. So, have you ever actually wondered why your partner's text doesn't excite you anymore? Seriously, think back to the honeymoon phase of your relationship. I mean, a single text message from them would cause this massive, undeniable spike in your heart rate, right? But now, maybe 3-4 years later, that exact same notification barely registers an emotional blip. A lot of people totally panic when this happens. They think, oh no, the romance is dead. But honestly, I'm here to tell you that it absolutely doesn't mean your relationship is failing. And surprise, surprise, the problem doesn't actually lie in the technology itself. The science behind that fading spark is actually a really well-documented neurological phenomenon called dopamine resistance. Basically, when receiving a message from your partner becomes highly predictable, just entirely routine, your brain's baseline dopamine release recalibrates. It essentially builds a tolerance. It now needs a significantly higher stimulus to achieve that same rush of excitement you used to get. So the key takeaway here, bombarding your partner with hundreds of meaningless texts throughout the workday is just a terrible strategy. Cognitive science literally tells us that the anticipation of a reward is vastly more powerful than the reward itself. So instead, try using strategic teasing. Send highly ambiguous messages during peak work hours. This forces the brain to delay gratification. And get this, that strategy can actually trigger a massive 65% surge in dopamine release compared to just your standard casual check-in. It's a total game changer. And just to show you exactly how severe this tech-induced relationship fatigue really is, check out this staggering number. A stark 47% of couples report a massive drop in relationship satisfaction directly attributed to phubbing. Now, if you aren't familiar with that term, it means phone snubbing. It's that thing where you're physically present with your partner sitting right there on the couch, but your cognitive presence is just entirely absorbed by your screen. It is, without a doubt, a massive intimacy killer. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. Here's an incredibly actionable solution for you. Relationships that strictly enforce tech-free zones in their household actually have a 3.2 times higher survival rate. 3.2! By establishing clear periods of digital silence and creating physical spaces where screens are just outright banned, you literally give your brain the space it needs to reset those dopamine pathways. And, actually connect with the real, live human beings sitting right across from you. Moving right along to part two, the evolution of romantic tech. Now, this timeline brilliantly illustrates the psychological shift we've all been through over the last couple of decades. Let's take a quick trip back to the 2000s, the SMS era. Remember when texts actually had a premium cost and a strict character limit? Because of that, every single message was a real event. It fostered high anticipation, high intentionality. That was peak emotional value. Fast forward to the 2010s, and we hit the instant messenger era. Constant connectivity, read receipts, social media, all of this brought an extreme devaluation to the texts we sent. And worse, it gave birth to that terrible, tense, left-on-red anxiety, not to mention the algorithms that quietly encourage micro-cheating. But now, welcome to the 2020s. We are officially in the biohacking era. We're now leveraging physiological data from wearables and AI to generate profound empathy. We're fundamentally shifting from just having a high quantity of digital connection to actually optimizing the quality of our presence. Which leads us perfectly into section 3, biohacking empathy with wearables. Okay, so this is where things get really fascinating. We're pivoting from technology acting as a pure distraction to technology acting as an actual prosthetic for empathy. And trust me, we are light years beyond those old Bluetooth-connected teddy bears here. Imagine this scenario for a second. Your partner comes home from work and they are just incredibly lethargic and quiet. Historically, you might look at that and interpret their emotional withdrawal as a lack of interest in you, right? And boom, a massive argument starts. But what if you could just glance at a shared app and see that your partner's heart rate variability, which is a primary indicator of physical stress, is deeply in the red? And what if you could see they only got 3 hours of deep sleep last night? Armed with that clinical telemetry, you entirely preempt a destructive misunderstanding. You immediately know, okay, tonight is definitely not the night for a heavy relationship talk. Instead, you deploy emotional support. And this totally applies to synchronizing menstrual and ovulation tracking, too. If you are algorithmically aware of biological mood fluctuations, you can attribute tension to biology rather than relationship decay. You are quite literally hacking relationship friction points using biology. How wild is that? Let's actually look at the hardware for a second to see how this is building out in the real market. When you look at the elite wearables out there, some really clear distinctions emerge. The Oura Ring Gen 4, for instance, has exceptional finger capillary sensors for HRV and pinpoint ovulation prediction. But where it truly shines is relationship integration through its native Oura Circles app. It's perfectly built for sharing generalized readiness scores, without exposing your exact heart rate minute by minute and creeping each other out. The Apple Watch Ultra 3, it sits comfortably right in the middle, mostly relying on third-party apps for that relationship sharing piece. Meanwhile, the Whoop 5.0, despite having incredible clinical-grade sensors, remains heavily focused on isolated, solo athletic performance. It currently has very weak relationship integration capabilities. All right, moving into Section 4, Haptics and Sexual Gamification. Let's talk about haptics. Specifically, devices like the Bond Touch 4 haptic bracelet. Now, this isn't just a simple little buzzer anymore. This thing uses advanced actuators to literally transmit a live human heartbeat in real time. The strategic advantages here are profound, especially if you're in a long-distance relationship, because it successfully simulates physical proximity, which we know is absolutely crucial for the survival rates of long-distance romance. It completely gamifies intimacy. But, and this is a big but, we have to acknowledge the critical vulnerabilities here too. These devices seriously risk inducing over-tracking paranoia. That obsessive location checking. And ironically, they can actually degrade your physical presence when you are finally together in the same room. Or worse, provide a covert, encrypted infrastructure for microcheating. But if you do want to use technology positively to inject some serious novelty into a stagnating relationship, well, here is a practical masterclass on sexual gamification. Step 1. Utilize dedicated couples apps like Kindu or Desire to send covert tasks and dares to each other. Step 2. Initiate digital roleplay during peak work hours. Remember what we just talked about with dopamine resistance? Doing this builds massive anticipation hours before you even get home. Step 3. Use medically vetted position apps to scientifically shift your physical environment away from the primary bedroom. This actually fires up entirely new neural pathways in the brain. And finally, Step 4. Leverage high-quality audio erotica platforms like Dipsy and actually sync those auditory experiences with your home's smart RGB lighting. So as the audio cadence shifts, the lighting hues shift with it, culminating in this fully immersive cinematic physical environment right in your own home. Pretty amazing, right? Up next is Section 5, the billion-dollar love tech economy. If you thought this was just a niche hobby, think again. This sector has violently outgrown the foundational dating apps like Match Group and Bumble. Just look at these valuations. Haptic wearables and simulation are currently sitting at $2.4 billion. Smart sexual health hardware is in an absolute hypergrowth phase at $1.9 billion. And couples counseling and gamification apps, they are dominating the space at a whopping $4.8 billion. Silicon Valley venture capitalists have realized a really profound truth here. The lifetime value of retaining a couple and maintaining their relationship is vastly more lucrative than continually trying to match single users. So, they are pouring billions into this ecosystem. And when we break down the demographic adoption of these tools, specifically looking at AI relationship counseling, the generational divide is just fascinating. Gen Z is highly receptive, showing an 86% approval rating for AI counseling. Millennials are right behind them at 79%. But Gen X, they sit at just a 28% approval rating, as they still overwhelmingly prefer traditional human therapists. And to be clear, apps like Coral or Paired aren't really meant to replace human therapists for deep, complex trauma. But Gen Z fully recognizes their value as gamified communication facilitators. They brilliantly lower the barrier to entry for having those difficult, awkward conversations. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, balancing data and emotion. Look, the trust index around health data privacy is heavily fractured right now, so we really need to be crystal clear on this. There is a razor-thin ethical boundary here. It is literally the difference between leveraging data to support your partner versus weaponizing that data to control them. Biohacking within a relationship requires immense emotional maturity. Your partner's REM sleep data or their readiness score must serve as a navigational compass for knowing when to deploy affection. It should never, absolutely never, be used as ammunition or surveillance during an argument. Remember, the whole objective here is the augmentation of empathy, not control. And that brings us to our final verdict. We're standing at this really critical inflection point where technology truly possesses the dual capability to be both the assassin of intimacy and its ultimate savior. The algorithms in our smartphones are clinically designed to hijack our dopamine pathways. Yes, but the solution isn't to just throw our phones in the river. The solution is intelligent biohacking. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself a hard question. Are you actively managing your digital boundaries, erecting tech-free zones, and leveraging your data for empathy? Or are you letting algorithms steal your cognitive presence from the person sitting right across from you? Choose wisely, because love in the digital era requires active, tactical maintenance. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you in the next explainer.